This is the debut podcast episode of Raising a Canadian. My name is Amy Cryer Percifield, and I recently gave birth to my first child, Theo, here in Toronto, Ontario. I am an American by birth and by citizenship. I moved to Canada with my husband, Ben, at the end of 2019 for a lot of reasons that we can get into in later podcasts. The thinking behind this new podcast is that my child is a dual citizen. Theodore is both an American and a Canadian. Ben, my husband, is also an American. And I've been very active on TikTok over the last year since Donald Trump was reelected, talking about a lot of the cultural differences between Canada and the US. But after I gave birth to Theo, I realized that I didn't really know that much about how to raise a Canadian. And so Raising a Canadian is a podcast about exactly that, raising a Canadian. So I thought for my very first podcast, it would be great to have a conversation with my husband, with whom I am raising Theodore. So Benjamin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your relationship to Canada and to me?
Thank you, Amy. I love you very much. Well, as you know, we are married and we have a child together. He's a Canadian American and we're becoming American Canadians, which is very exciting. I actually went to university in Canada at McGill University. And you know that I have a little bit of Canadian in me because I called it uni or university because the American in me is like screaming to call it college. But as a semi-Canadian, I'll call it uni. So my relationship to Canada is I went to school in Canada, I graduated, then I left. And I always thought in the back of my mind I'd come back someday. I thought that I would get a job that would bring me back to Canada. Moving to Canada is not that easy. You have to have some sort of job that warrants it. And I always thought, okay, what I would do is I would graduate. I would get specialized enough of a job that I would be able to earn my way back into Canada. I had no idea that it would be through an American, marrying an American, a very talented one at that would bring me back to Canada. As for my own personal background, I speak Chinese. I lived in China, so after graduating Canada, I moved to Beijing, and I thought that was going to be the way that I moved to Canada, but no, it wasn't. And the reason that I bring this up was that under the first Trump presidency, the trade war basically destroyed my job. And Amy and I were like, let's move to somewhere where, because my job was China-US consulting, and a little bit of tension is good, you know, a little bit of, murky waters are good for consultants to help navigate, but too much murkiness, no one wanted to do any business together. And so we tried moving to Singapore, actually. That's a story for a later podcast. But because we did interviews and we really attempted to move to Singapore, we reached out to realtors. We had a great time. Amy's company was like, we cannot lose Amy because Amy's a very special talent. Maybe that's a story for a different, but she got a extraordinary talent visa. That's okay. She's giving me the wrap-up single. Okay. We put so much pressure on her job that they moved her to Toronto. I guess I could go into the story about how we met, but I'm trying to keep it a short story about we moved to Canada because of Amy's job, which was creative director in advertising. And she got me in advertising myself. And now I work in advertising. She works as a full-time content creator. And we're two Americans trying to raise a Canadian. Back to you.
Thank you, Ben. That was a wonderful answer. And just in case it was missed, he went to McGill University and graduated in 2016 with a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and a minor in East Asian Studies. He is fluent in Mandarin Chinese, which he has been studying since high school. I myself used to be fluent in Spanish, like many Americans, but that's long gone. So for our first question. What does it mean to you personally to raise a Canadian?
it's so weird being an immigrant to Canada as an American. Before I moved to McGill, I told my grandpa that I was like, I am moving to a foreign country to study abroad. And he's like, Canada is not abroad. And, sound off in the comments if you think moving from America to Canada is studying abroad or moving abroad. But from my perspective, you need a passport to come to this different country that has different currency with a separate government. Therefore, it's abroad. And Amy can talk to cultural differences that she's found in the workforce, because I've actually worked in Canada longer than I've worked in America. So I don't know what the differences are, to tell you the truth. But it is an amazing opportunity to raise a Canadian as an American. There's going to be things. I'm a first-generation immigrant. My child's a first-generation immigrant. Or no, I'm the first-generation immigrant. He's a second-generation immigrant. It's confusing because, we're neighbors. We used to be such great allies, Canada and the U.S., and we want him to understand the culture that he comes from, that is America, but we also want him to be a Canadian. So I think that's the remit of this podcast is, sound off in the comments. Tune in. Tell us as much as you can. We're open books, and we're happy to learn about how we can raise a Canadian, because this is going to be a long process that we're looking forward to.
Yeah, and I just like to add that because Ben moved to Canada when he was 18, lived here until he was 22, then went and lived in China for a couple of years, and then moved back to Chicago, where he's from, which is where we met. I lived in Chicago for 11 years after graduating from Michigan State. We have an 8-year age difference, in case the math wasn't mathing for you there. So we met when Ben was back in Chicago trying to figure out his next move after Trump destroyed U.S.-Chinese business development. And so I had only ever been to Canada on vacation before coming here for my interview in August of 2019 for the transfer from the Chicago office of my company to the Toronto office. And I was very unfamiliar with Canadian culture. I had been to Whistler skiing when I was 18 with my family. I also had been to Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island, the Thousand Islands and Niagara Falls, all before the age of 7 years old. So when we lived in Pennsylvania when I was really little, my parents loved Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. So for me, in the back of my head, Canada was always a vacation destination and like an outdoor playground. So after I met Ben, we're falling in love, and he asked me about 6 months after we started dating, would you ever consider leaving the United States? And I said, absolutely. He knew we moved to Arkansas when I was 9, that I had grown up around like MAGA culture before it was even, way before it was called Tea Party, way before it was MAGA, very, very evangelical Christian, heavy into gun culture. Actually, fun fact, Arkansas was Democrat when we moved there, Dixiecrat, because the Democrats used to actually be the racist ones, and the parties have really flipped since Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh. A lot of those voters went from being Democrats to Republicans. But that is also another story for another podcast. But I had been alarmed at what I saw during the Trump presidency. So this was January of 2019. And I said, yeah, absolutely. So we started looking into it. And I told my company, which was a global advertising agency, that I really wanted to move abroad in April of 2019. So I had a meeting with the global mobility team. And then Ben and I actually flew out to Singapore, to Hong Kong, and to Bangkok. I actually interviewed at 8 different advertising agencies in Singapore, and I had a tentative offer to go to a PR firm within the same holding company as the one I had been currently working for. At the same time, my team, which was based out of Chicago and Atlanta and St. Louis, had won a large piece of business for one of our existing clients. in Canada. So they needed somebody to move to Canada to run the business. I found out about that in August and started working on the business remotely. I flew out for an interview here in Toronto, which was my first time to Canada, not on like a outdoor recreational vacation. Hit it off with everybody. I mean, I have never felt as special as I did throughout the whole process of being wooed to come to Canada. Definitely the highlight of my career was the way that the Canadian office treated me. And, I'll always treasure that experience close to my heart. Really opened the door for me coming to Canada. My official start date in the Canadian office was December 1st of 2019. We actually crossed the border November 23rd. That's what the date is on my work permit. So I had about a week of transition between the Chicago and the American work before I was put on Canadian payroll. As we all know, the pandemic then struck 3 months later. And I really struggled to acclimate to Canadian culture. I really struggled to acclimate to my company's Canadian office because it was a Zoom world, and I practiced a form of fairly esoteric advertising called omni-channel marketing, which has a very different meaning in the U.S. than it does from Canada. And the way that it was practiced was perfected in Chicago, at least the creative side of it. And so I was here to kind of help develop it, but it was so different from what the whole advertising ecosystem was used to in Canada. It was a very difficult challenge for a lot of different reasons. And so I struggled to acclimate, and then I went to a different agency with a big promotion, and it was the same exact remit, which was to bring this type of advertising to Canada to help advertising clients be more profitable, and ran into the same set of challenges of acclimating to Canadian culture and working as an American when the leadership in both cases were American. But I was on the ground in Canada, largely in a Zoom environment, and really not being that exposed to what Canadian culture is, what the Canadian norms are. And so that was really the impetus behind founding, doing my TikToks, because for all the Americans who, now that Trump was reelected, were thinking, oh, let me run away to Canada. I wanted my TikToks to be more like a warning, essentially, that this is a very, very, very different country. It is not the same as the U.S., and you cannot bring your American assumptions north of the 45th parallel and expect to succeed. And so this podcast is essentially the same type of, comes from the same place of like, okay, I wasn't raised in Canada. I have very limited experience here, although I've lived here for almost 6 years, because a large portion of that was during COVID. I'm still acclimating to Canada, and I probably will forever be acclimating to Canada. It's a much different culture for me, whereas Ben, he went to McGill at age 18, and those are really formative years. So he understands Canadian culture intuitively much better than I do, and fits in much better than I do, I would say. So for me, what does it mean to raise a Canadian? That's the question. I don't really know. I think the biggest thing for me is an appreciation of multiculturalism, because in the U.S. it's a melting pot, and in Canada it's a mosaic. So everybody gets to retain their individuality, their own backstories. You're not expected to lose parts of yourself to come to Canada, for better or for worse, whereas in the U.S. you're expected to really sacrifice a lot of yourself to become an American. And so for me, I think to raise a Canadian, it means to raise Theo with an appreciation for a lot of different cultures, to tolerate people who are, not just tolerate, but embrace people who are very different from himself. But beyond that, I'm really excited to start this journey with my guests and my listeners as I explore with Ben, what does it mean to raise a Canadian? So that was a very long first question. Would you like to add something, Ben?
I think that one thing that we kind of glazed over was that we got married October 2019, right before we moved to Canada in November 24th, 2019. And that was because you can't have a corporation move a boyfriend and a girlfriend to Canada, and you can't stay in Canada as a boyfriend and a girlfriend because you wouldn't have a visa. I moved to Canada on an open spousal work permit where they pretty much gave me any job possibility except for early childhood educator and sex worker. So I felt like in that moment they had truly clipped my wings. But no, it was amazing that not even basically a year after we met, we had gotten married. And, they say when you know, and this isn't necessarily a podcast about love, but I wanted to share that we got married really fast. And so COVID was a really interesting time where it was like, pre-COVID, you'd spend like 4 hours a day with your partner. And then post-COVID, you'd spend 24 hours a day steeped in anxiety. You think the world's trying to kill you. So, interesting time nonetheless. And we are married and we have a child. So, just wanted to add that part of our story as well.
Yeah, always a good reminder that we took a leap of faith. I knew Ben was the one, actually, the night we met. I had a premonition. And I saw an ad on the Chicago L train that said, Ben, it was an ad for a Zip car, which is like a rent by the hour car service. And it was like a picture of a guy named Ben, because the headline said, Ben, you ready for your proposal? And he was down on one knee, holding a ring up to a girl in a field of corn. And I was like, interesting. And then when we got off the L to walk to my apartment for him to spend the night, a woman who was selling postcards on the street kind of accosted me, and I was like, no, not interested. And she looked at me straight in the eyes and said, well, maybe your husband is. And I was like, whoa.
Funny story. I didn't even propose because, Amy took me to, I think it was a Filipino restaurant. Cebu. And she was just like, you are marrying me. Like, there wasn't even a question in there. She just told me, you are getting married to me, and because we are moving to Canada. And it was really funny because I then texted my mom and I was like, hey, I'm getting married tomorrow. And she's like, what? Are you kidding me? And it was really funny because it was like, there was no question, because there never was a question. It's very sweet.
Yeah, there never was a question. I love that we're sharing about our relationship as we kind of delve into, raising Theo, who is the product of our love. So I think our love story is very relevant. All right. So here's a great question. How do you plan on balancing our own upbringings as American with the Canadian culture that Theo will grow up within?
That's one of those things that I just think that you can't overthink. So not to put you on blast, Amy, but for instance, before we had Theo, Amy was like, I need you to call me Mum. That's what Canadians say. They don't say Mom. So for instance, Americans, we call mummies Mom with a hard A, not an O. And I guess Canadians, the British ones, the Anglo sort of cohort of Canadians, skew a little bit more towards mum and mummy. And so Amy was like, I need you to call me Mum. And I was like, please, I don't think I can. I'll try my best, but I really want to call you Mom. This is me. This is my Americanness. And, that lasted for like 45 seconds because like the first day, Amy, I think, called herself Mom, and she was like, okay, I can't even do this. But that's one of those things that it's like, it'll be interesting to see what Theo's language is. But, at school, he'll hear other people refer to their mums, their mummies. And will he say Mom, or will he get linguistic exposure to Mum? Mum's the word. I don't know. It'll be really interesting to see, but it's one of those things that I don't think that I'll try and assimilate any part of my instincts, because I think parenting is such an intuitive thing that the more that you overthink it, the more that you are not. You just have to sort of do as you do. I think that the balance will just be completely natural and intuitive. I'll say the words that I say. I won't try to say pencil crayons. I'll say colored pencils. I mean, my background is always language and linguistic, but I know that it's more than just words. But that's where my head skews, where it's like, I'm not going to be saying any of the Canadianized versions of things. I'll probably just say the American things. And it'll be interesting to see if Theo, by virtue of being in Canada and having Canadian friends and Canadian upbringing, if he'll say the things that we say or if he'll say the things that everyone around him says. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
As I listen to you talk, it's making me think that, at least from my point of view, I want to let him lead that process. And I want to let him decide like what he wants to call things. So if it's weird to him that his mom's and dad call, pencil crayons, colored pencils at home, if he corrects us and says, no, mom and dad, those are pencil crayons. Okay, Thea, they're pencil crayons. Yeah, if he's like, stop calling her mom. She's not mom, she's mum. You're pronouncing it wrong. Like, I would like to let Theo decide how much he wants to conform at home to like the outside culture that like his friends have, like how much, because those little things do matter, especially when you're a kid, right? Like, so if he doesn't want to be the odd one out and he wants to use Canadian terms for things, we will absolutely follow that at home. I want to let him, in terms of balancing it, I want to let Theo lead with things like that. My mother, who will be on this podcast, because I think it would be great to have all of our parents on the podcast so that we can ask them about parenting us. My mother, Betsy, is a super American patriot. She is not MAGA. She's anti-MAGA. She's a staunch Democrat, and I think she's been volunteering for the Democratic Party since high school. My grandfather, her dad, was a member of the Steelworkers Union. So I grew up in a very pro-union household by virtue of my mom being very pro-union. And she is very much into politics, was friends with Senator Ann Henry when she was at the University of Arkansas, loves politics. I once got invited to a fundraiser for Dick Durbin that was hosted by Christy Hefner, which is Hugh Hefner's daughter, in Chicago, and it was $500, and I was like, oh my God, I can't afford $500 for like a 1 hour thing. My mom was like, no questions asked. She just zelled me the money right away and was like, please go. And I got to meet Dick Durbin and some other Illinois lawmakers at Christy Hefner's penthouse. So my mom's amazing. She really loves politics and she loves America, and she believes that America is the greatest country on earth and the greatest country that has ever existed. And I will have her on this podcast and we can ask her all about it. She brought with her, so Theo got his American citizenship formalized on August 7th of 2025. She was here actually visiting, and she brought with her a bald eagle stuffed animal toy to give to him as a gift and celebration of him officially being an American citizen. He was born American at birth because Ben and I are both natural born U.S. citizens who each lived in the U.S. for the requisite amount of time. And so the point that I'm getting to is certain family members are very staunchly American. I would say your dad is maybe more nationalistic than your mother, Ben. My mom is very, very proud to be American and loves the values of freedom of speech and the best that America can be, a nation of immigrants, of innovation and exploration. And so I think that Theo will get a lot of the best parts of America from his grandparents, and his cousins are all American. He has 2 cousins, and my brothers still live in the U.S., so he has American family back home who will help him understand and process what it means to be American. That is why we need help teaching him how to be Canadian, because we don't have any Canadian family. Both Ben and I are first-generation immigrants to Canada, and we don't have any information on that aside from what our friends are doing. I think it's, in terms of American values, I'm not worried. It's really the Canadian values. I think multiculturalism is a big one, and I think bilingualism. I've decided already that when Theo starts learning French, I'm going to start learning French with him. He's already learning Chinese from Ben. We have a little book called Xiaobaozi, the little bun, and it's bilingual in Chinese, Mandarin, and English. So he'll actually be trilingual. But I think that bilingualism is a really understated part of being Canadian. And I'm really looking forward to learning French alongside Theo. Okay, so on to the next question. In what ways, Ben, do you feel like raising a Canadian is different than raising a American, or raising a child in Canada? How is that different than raising a child in the U.S.?
Hard to say. I haven't raised a American. I only have experience raising a Canadian so far, but like childcare costs were really cheap. I think that so far it's been really nice to have public health care. Both Amy and I sought mental health services. Like I did a group setting with dads to be and dads that have been, and Amy did one with moms. And it's been really nice just having public health care.
Like you, Ben, I have obviously never raised a child in the U.S., as Theo is my first child, and we're raising him together here in Canada. But having seen what it's like to raise a child in the U.S., it seems to be far more difficult. I'm not even talking about just the mat leave, which is atrocious under U.S. federal law. Family Medical Leave Act. American employees are only guaranteed 12 weeks unpaid leave for qualifying family or medical leave reasons, and you have to work at a company that has over 50 employees, 50, and it's unpaid. And there's a lot of funny business that happens where, people come back from mat leave, or right before they go on mat leave, they're let go because there's just way fewer job protections in the U.S., and the courts tend to side with employers because of that. So there's a lot more job instability for women of childbearing age in the U.S., which I think makes women much more reluctant to have children. I have personally found employers to be very supportive of women taking mat leave, or at least they do a really good show of it. I actually am not on mat leave. I was laid off in August 2023 and then have been freelancing ever since. So I actually don't qualify for mat leave, but I worked alongside women who went on mat leave. In Canada, for the American listeners, it's really 12 months at the minimum, 18 months at the maximum, and it's up to you how much you want to take. The pay is not very good, so it's up to your employer if they want to do what's called a top-up, if they want to help pay, increase it more. Otherwise, it's the same as your unemployment would be, or in Canada they call it employment insurance, which is, I think, a much more graceful, polite term. That would have worked out to be about $32,000 a year Canadian. So really, really low. I mean, poverty wages, basically. But it's at least pay, right? And it's run through the federal government, just like employment insurance is as a whole in Canada. Whereas in the U.S., it's handled at the state level. And so I just think the process of going on mat leave is much easier in Canada, and companies tend to actually hold those jobs for women for when they come back. And pat leave, I've seen people take a lot more of. Ben is going back to work next week. He was given 17 weeks off with a very generous top-up schedule. So we're very, very, very thankful that he works for the company that he does. So that's a big part of why it's easier, I think, to have children in Canada. There's that financial side and the job protection side. I also think that there's a big safety element. When you raise children in the U.S., you have to worry about guns a lot more. If your kids are going over to someone's house for a sleepover, you have to have a conversation with those other parents about whether or not there's weapons in the house. Are there older siblings who could have weapons in the house? If you do have guns, are they kept locked up in a gun cabinet, in a gun safe? Is the ammunition kept separate from the weapons themselves? like, that's just a normal part of like sending your kids over for sleepovers. You have to have that conversation. And the American Pediatric Association has even made videos. I've seen doctors on TikTok and Instagram making videos encouraging parents to have these conversations with each other, because a lot of the gunshot wounds that involve children in the U.S. are accidents. So, a toddler finds a gun over at a friend's house in a parent's nightstand, thinks it's a toy, pulls the trigger. So that's a big fear, obviously. Then there's school shootings. Children are basically not allowed to wear light up shoes in the U.S. anymore, because it's a very easy target for a shooter to see. So I want my child, it's silly, but I want Theo to be able to wear light up shoes if he wants. It's not a joke that a lot of parents in the U.S. send their kids to school with backpacks that have Kevlar or steel plating in them that the children can use as shields if they happen to be caught in a school shooting. And then there's just the general divisiveness of, almost tribalism at this point. Are you red or are you blue? Which are like the two, I feel like, primary colors. Even though Canadian politics is much more divisive than it's been in the past, it's still nowhere near, at least in Toronto where I live, and what I see on the news, it's nowhere near what it is in the U.S. in terms of, companies not doing business with each other, restaurants refusing to serve patrons who are of a different political party, the fact that the political party is now a cornerstone of your identity. That, to me, makes the U.S. feel like a very hostile place to live. And so that is challenging when you're trying to teach children core values, like the golden rule and, inclusiveness and just general, like, how to be a good person. It's very difficult to do as well when the leader of your country, President Trump, has been found civilly liable for rape and continues to, make comments that disparage people who have special needs or are women or people of color. And then you add to it, like, the ICE raids that U.S. citizens are often caught up in. Like, add all that together, and I think it would be extremely stressful to be raising a child in the U.S. And so there's like a functional side to the benefits of living in Canada and starting a family in Canada. And that, to me, was at least the big driver for wanting to move abroad. I obviously wanted to get international business experience in advertising to make me a much more competitive global talent. But I wanted to work in a different market, and I wanted to live abroad. And I wanted to start a family with Ben. We had already talked about marriage before. We very quickly got married so that he could get his spousal work permit and legally move to Canada and have the right paperwork. And if we hadn't gotten married, first of all, it would have been illegal for him to continue to live with me in Canada. So there's that. But then secondly, when COVID happened, he wouldn't have been able to stay legally and keep re-entering every 180 days. So really glad that everything worked out as it did. But that's kind of my comparison on raising a child in the U.S. versus raising a child in Canada. What is one Canadian stereotype that you secretly hope your child lives up to?
There's not many that come to mind other than Canadians are nice. And I don't think that's a bad reality if he is nice, or if he plays hockey, or if he is really good at winter sports. One of the things that I've been remarkably consistent about, and Amy can back me up on this, is that I really want him to be an Olympic speed skater. I want him to go. It's one of the most amazing things about living in Canada. Like, there was a work ski day where we went to some Ontario ski hills, so like, temper your expectations. But what was crazy about it was that there was kids who, like, apparently they're half in school and half in this sort of ski school situation where it's like they're being groomed to be Olympic skiers. Like, there is infrastructure here for winter Olympic sports. So, like, I just don't know if there's opportunities in America for him to do speed skating like there are in Canada. That's why I like the idea of him being an Olympic speed skater. So stereotypically, if he becomes an Olympic winter athlete, that would be awesome. If he's really nice, that would be awesome. If he's like bilingual, that'd be cool too. What about you, Amy?
Yeah, I think secretly, I hope that he is really good at winter sports. I really hope that he's good at hockey or good at skiing or good at ice skating. If he wants to do, figure skating, like you said, Canada just has such an amazing winter sports infrastructure that I really want him to take advantage of it. And I also want him to speak English and French fluently. It would be great if he spoke Mandarin Chinese like you do, Ben, but I think it's really important to me that, bilingualism is something that has consistently come up in the comments on my TikToks. And, a big part of the country was formed by, the merger between New Britain and New France. So it's really important to me that Theo speaks French, not just, because school is making him speak it, but because I want him to genuinely appreciate French Canadian culture and the contributions that French Canadians have made to culture in general and Canada. And because I don't want to perpetuate a lot of this Anglos versus Quebecers stuff that I see in culture. And I think because I'm American, I don't understand it. I have no skin in the game, so to speak, because I didn't grow up here. And, Ben and I both have applied for Canadian citizenship, but are not yet Canadian citizens. So this isn't something that we can really speak to, but I have at least seen, and Ben lived in Montreal, Quebec for 4 years when he went to McGill for university. But I have seen Anglos in Toronto say the most ridiculous, racist doesn't seem like the right term. I'm sure there's a better term for it. Hateful things about Quebecers and about Quebec culture, about the French accent that Quebecers have. Just really hateful stereotypes. And I don't have as many friends in Quebec. I have some friends in Quebec, and I had a few lovely coworkers out of Quebec as well, and they were all wonderful. And I actually found them a lot easier to work with in a lot of the cases because I found Quebecers to be much more direct and much more honest, not afraid to say things straight, not afraid to offend people, but to really get to the heart of the matter and save time. And it felt very American to me. So I actually at times have felt much more comfortable with Quebecers. But that kind of dogging on each other of Anglos hating on Quebecers and Quebecers hating on the rest of Canada. Although, again, I haven't seen that because I'm not close enough to Quebecers where I feel like they would do that in front of me. I do not want him to participate in that at all. And I want our house to be a house where we really respect American culture. We respect Quebecois culture, and we recognize that within Canada, Quebecois culture is unique. And also appreciate, obviously, rest of Canadian culture and First Nations culture. I think, like I said earlier on this podcast, multiculturalism is a very uniquely Canadian thing. Ben and I come from the United States, where it's a melting pot, and you're really encouraged to lose your backstory to become a American and conform to what it means to be an American. And what's so beautiful about Canada is that you're not expected to do that. Quebecers have their own unique culture within Canada. First Nations each have their own languages and cultures and traditions. And then different areas of Canada, the prairies, are obviously very different from Ontario, which is very different from Newfoundland and Labrador. So I want Theo to grow up really appreciating multiculturalism, and I want him to speak French and read books in French recreationally. I want him to visit Quebec often. I want to even travel to France so he can practice his French in other French-speaking countries. So not just France, but go to other French-speaking countries. Maybe go to Senegal in Africa or Tahiti in in Polynesia. really making French a part of our culture and in our house. And I'm excited to learn French as well. I've always wanted to learn French. So, yeah, that's my take on stereotypes. One last question. What is a uniquely Canadian experience that you can't wait to share with Theo for the first time?
A uniquely Canadian experience that I can't wait to share with Theo for the first time. First off, sound off in the comments because we're both Americans, so we're grasping at straws here. Because the first thing that comes to mind is like Niagara Falls. It's like we're so Ontario brained, we're so Toronto brained. So we've never done Sugar Shack. I'm trying to think.
Never seen the Northern Lights?
I've never seen the Northern Lights. You know what I really want to do is I really want to go camping with Theo in a provincial park. Provincial parks you don't have to pay for. You just show up, bring a tent, a canoe, do some portaging as they call it. I would love to go camping with my little boy. I did Knowles growing up, where I went camping for a month, and I've always wanted a little baby boy that I could take canoeing and such. I think that'd be really sweet. So yeah, something with the great wide wilderness would be really sweet. How about you, Amy?
Yeah, I really want to take him to a Sugar Shack when he's older. I feel like that's a quintessential Canadian experience that I haven't yet done. In Quebec, obviously, where they have a lot of the maple syrup taps and whatnot. I also have not been ice skating on Lake Louise, although we have been to Lake Louise. Ben and I have. We went skiing in Banff with my family a few years ago, and we stayed in Banff, but we drove out to Lake Louise and that Fairmont Hotel that's right there, the Chateau. But we did not ice skate on it. And so I really would like to share that experience with Theo for the first time. Also canoeing with him or doing water sports on Lake Louise for the first time, like in the summer. Like I would just love to see those parts of Canada with him. I also would love to visit the Anne of Green Gables house, which on Prince Edward Island, which I know is made up, and I know they built it like as a tourist attraction for largely Japanese tourists, because I hear that they're absolutely obsessed with Anne of Green Gables. But I would like to do that with Theo as well. That would be my first time, because I've been in Niagara Falls a bunch. When I was 6 years old, we drove up from Pennsylvania, where we were living, which is where my family is originally from. I remember wearing the raincoat, and we got off the boat. We went on the Maid of the Mist, and we went behind the waterfall. I can't wait to share those experiences with Theo. I also would love to take him up north. I feel like, it's exorbitantly expensive to travel up north to like Nunavut or the Yukon or the Northwest Territories, but I really want to show him all of Canada, and I have always wanted to visit the Arctic. I really want to see the Northern Lights. I really want to see like vast expanses of snow in the winter and like vast expanses of like tundra, with Arctic wildflowers. Like pictures of the Arctic year round just looks so beautiful, and the way the light is different, the sunlight is different. I'm a photographer. It's actually how I got into advertising. I was a street style photographer, so I did a lot of outdoor photography. The sunlight is so different once you get north of the Arctic Circle. So those are all things I'm really, really excited to do with Theo in Canada. So, yeah, I think that's a great first episode. Before we end the show tonight, is there anything else that you'd like to add, Ben, that you feel like I haven't covered, that you would like to share about your experience being an American who lives in Canada, or having a Canadian son as an American, whether it was like going through the birthing process here in Canada as a partner? Like, are there any cultural differences that you would like to share?
Thank you for metaphorically and literally just passing me the mic there. Nothing else that I can really think of other than we invite you into this process of raising this Canadian together. You being the audience. We don't know what we don't know. And a big part of creating this podcast is learning from the strength of the audience about all the things that we should be doing to raise a Canadian. So to answer your question directly, yeah, the birthing process was amazing at Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is crazy. They have like in utero surgeries. It's like a world class hospital. There's a whole bunch of different stories about how we use the labor and delivery triage center all the time. All the nurses there were really lovely. All except for one, but that's a story for a different day as well. All of the doctors were amazing. All of the process was just beautiful. The day that actually Amy was scheduled for a C-section, I fainted in the delivery room. In the PACU, the like staging room before the delivery room. And all the nurses were so sweet to me. They gave me apple juice, which apple juice is my favorite juice. So I was on cloud 9. Everyone was just so lovely except for one person. That's just a different story for a different day. But I've never felt so accepted as I have in Canada. When Amy got the job offer to move to Canada, I was so excited because all of my friends basically live here in Toronto. Having gone to McGill once again, it's like they're either going to live in Vancouver, Toronto, or stay in Montreal. A decent amount of them were from Toronto. A decent amount of them moved to Toronto. And so it's been such a delight living in Toronto, raising a Canadian. And I'm so excited to see, as this process goes, what this grows into, what Theo grows into, and it's so nice to be in the beginning phase of it all. So that being said, I appreciate you. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening. We're literally just starting, but this is where we'd be like, and a word from our sponsors. Thank you, sponsor here. But we don't have any sponsors now, so thank you to you. You are our sponsor. You are what is you're the inspiration for us making this podcast. And our podcast will become better when you interact with it. You send us prompts. We literally got prompts from AI because we were like, we don't know. So if you have good questions, put them down. We're happy to answer them. I might not be always a recurrent guest because this is Amy's thing, but I'm always here as a part of the process and so excited to see where this goes. So love you very much, Amy. Love you very much, Theo. And thank you to the audience for listening.
Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you, Ben, for joining me as my first podcast guest. I just want to echo everything that Ben said. Thank you for making it to the end of the episode. So excited to see what this turns into and hoping this becomes a dialogue that doesn't just help us raise Theo, but helps other Canadian parents and Canadians in general explore what it means to live in Canada, what it means to be a Canadian, what level, if any, Canadianness plays a role in their lives at all, because I've also read that Canada is the first post-national state. And so there's a lot of people who live in Canada and are technically Canadian citizens for whom Canadianness has no bearing on them as an identity, beyond that being the nationality on their passport. So excited to dig into and explore all of that. And I'm hoping to get a really diverse roster of guests. A big challenge for us living in downtown Toronto. We live in a bit of a bubble, and it's a challenge for us to kind of get out and see more of Canada and learn from diverse groups of Canadians. We have an amazing community of friends who really are like chosen family here in Canada, who are just incredible supports and just surround us with such love. But we're looking to, expand our understanding beyond just our core community that's like our private life, and have more dialogues and more conversations. And like Ben said, I'm sure he will join me for more episodes. We'll probably co-host here and there, but this is really, my project to kind of expand on what I've been doing on TikTok. And I'm really looking forward to making more episodes and hope you'll join me again soon. So with that, have a good night. It is September 13th, 2025 at 9 p.m. And yeah, it is a Saturday night and we are in the dark recording a podcast. Hashtag new parent life. And with that, over and out, Canada. Good night.